Hey deserving listeners, it's time for me to read your comments on my videos from last week and react to them. Let's get to it. Actually, this is an email that was in relation to the videos that I make. My dog is barking. Gabrielle from Paris says, I'm listening to you talk about the subtleties of communication. I'm wondering, does this apply less so when someone is not a native speaker? Right, so what Gabrielle is talking about is that sometimes I'm talking about how people communicate to each other on these reality TV shows and how important it is to pay attention to that, and how sometimes a lot of misunderstanding can result in a lot of attachment wounds, and we get hurt or afraid. We convert that into anger and then hostility. And what about if someone is speaking in not their native language? Might that mean that there are more miscommunications and more difficulty understanding the subtleties of communication? Absolutely, 100%. Not only just language, but also culture. When you have someone from the Philippines talking to someone who grew up in the United States, you're going to be talking cross-culturally, and you're not going to understand each other all the time. Your sense of humor might be different. Not always, but might be. The sense of self, even just the sense of how we construct ourselves, who we are as people, how we connect to the outside world, is also constructed within our culture. So absolutely, and maybe I should comment on that more. I started doing Plathville, Welcome to Plathville reaction videos. A lot of you asked me to do that, and I hadn't watched the show, so it's been interesting to get into. I plan on going all the way to the end, by the way. A lot of you said that I should do that, and so I will. Julia said, can anyone truly consent to being on reality TV if they've never even watched TV? End of comment. Yeah. So what I was getting into is this question as to the ethics of having children on reality TV shows or even YouTube channels, that we want to think about whether or not these individuals can truly provide consent. In the same way that for y'all, I'm guessing you're adults, people can't just come into your house and film you and put you on television or the internet. You have rights as a human, as a citizen, and you can say, no, I don't want these people to film me for a reality TV show. So that makes sense. And when you ask children who are 5, 7 years old the same question, do you consent to being on a reality TV show or on a YouTube channel, and they say very enthusiastically, yes, 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 can we really trust that their answer is informed? I don't know anyone who would think that that's an informed choice that a child is making. It'd be like asking a child, do you want to lock in your career as a fireman for the rest of your life? Right now, 7-year-old Johnny, you say you want to be a fireman, but are you willing to lock that in so that you have no other career choices? 7-year-old boys might be like, yeah, absolutely, 100%, fireman. Come the time they're 25, they're like, how did anyone think that I had the ability to answer that question at the age of 7? And that's just like a career. The question as to whether or not you would be on a reality TV show or on a YouTube channel is a very, very complex question to answer, one that children cannot make. And where's the age cutoff? Do we say 16? Do we say 18? Do we say 21? I don't know. But it is a question that we are not addressing enough. There's a lot of people who I'm quite positive 10, 20 years from now are going to look back and say, society failed me because there weren't laws and regulations to protect me from this. Now, what Julia is bringing up is the people on Plathville, they don't have television. So even the older kids, and maybe even the adults, do they really have the ability to provide consent to being on this show since they don't even watch television? How can they really know what they're getting into? And that's a very, very good question. And I don't know what the answer is. I suspect in 10 or 20 years from now, there will be more laws and more regulations around this. It usually takes a while for legislation to catch up with new things like reality TV and YouTube. But it's an interesting question. And I think on one hand, we will benefit by those regulations and laws because it'll protect children. But on the other hand, we're going to lose potential content and opportunities to be able to learn from things. I think that sometimes And I don't think this justifies the risk of having children on these shows who will later regret it. But there is a slight bit of benefit of having these kinds of channels, having these kinds of TV shows, such that we can actually see real lives and maybe learn from it, such as when I'm watching and I'm reacting to it. Now, I will say that Welcome to Plathville, at least thus far that I've watched, they clearly are not paying attention to the younger kids. The younger kids have barely any time on screen, and I'm guessing that is purposeful. Or they're not interesting. I don't know. Anna says, oh my God, the wine talk made me laugh. So just chiming in here, in that episode, we saw that, I can't remember the old Ethan, I think his name is. I don't have my family tree in front of me. Ethan was like trying to put ice in his wine, and the wife was like, you don't put ice in wine. That's really stupid. So Anna, and then I was saying, if you want to put ice in your wine, put ice in your wine. It's not a big deal. It's just a beverage. You know, as I was saying, I have a lot of wine snobs in my life, and there are wine snobs that are snobbish about everything, and then there are wine snobs that are just like, look, wine is a beverage, like water or beer or soda pop or something. I don't ever call it soda pop. Why did I just call it soda pop? I always call it soda. Anyway, it's, you know, like Coca-Cola, right? And I said Coca-Cola. Why'd I say, why not Coke? Well, I think because cocaine, that's why I say, I want to make sure people understand I'm saying Coca-Cola. Anyway, you put ice in Coca-Cola, or you don't put it in, or whatever. You know, the point is like, don't be precious about your beverages. Drink it however you want to. Chilled, unchilled, in a wine glass, in a regular, anyway. So Anna is saying, oh my God, the wine talk made me laugh. I live in Italy, specifically in Trieste. Here in summer, they drink Spritz Bianco. This is white wine with sparkling water, really cold, and may have ice cubes. If you are at the beach, they serve it in a plastic jar with plastic glasses. This is my favorite drink. Yeah, so, you know, in Italy, fancy Italy, they drink wine with ice. Anyway, Peyton says, is there anything psychologically troubling about the children not having friends outside the family? I could be wrong, but I feel like that could be really problematic and make the children feel trapped. Yeah, it's hard to know, Peyton, if the children are, so, you know, separate from the fact that they're on a reality TV show, this family, they don't have friends outside the family. They're homeschooled. They seem to have no contact or very little contact with the outside world. And you just have to ask this question. A lot of people do have this question. Are the children damaged by the fact that they're not being exposed to people outside the family? It's unclear. We don't really know. Certainly it's strange, and we could look at potential downsides. But when we look at the history of our species, even just going back a few decades, 50, 100 years ago, and around the world, there are plenty of people who live like this, and that's just the way they live. They're on a farm far away from everyone else. They don't have money to travel or a car, or they just don't have the ability to have much contact with many other people, and they turn out fine. I would say for 99.99999% of the development of the human species, we were in contact with, at maximum, maybe 150 people, maybe even as low as 50 people. So now you would argue, well, if it's 50 people, you still have friends or cousins or aunts and uncles, more people that you're in contact with. Yeah, okay. But the point is that we can't just look at something, as I always say, and have it feel wrong to us, which is an emotional feeling, which is probably based on culture, because if you grew up like I did, this family looks very strange to me. But we can't just have that gut feeling have us lead to intellectual conclusions that we know is a bad thing. We can't just look at something and go, this doesn't feel right to me, it has to be bad. It's all about outcomes. And there's probably not a lot of research on this. And I'm guessing that if there is, that there are mixed results, that you have some kids that do really poorly in that kind of environment and some kids that do really fine in that kind of environment. And it makes sense to me because regardless of the environment a child grows up in terms of the societal elements, which are important, it is extremely important the way a child is raised by their caregivers and their siblings. If they're loved and attuned to and not abused, then generally speaking, you're going to have good outcomes. So whether or not you live on some isolated farm or you live in the middle of the city and there's millions of people around, how are you raised? Do you feel loved? Do you feel cared for? I think those are more important factors. But you bring up a good point, Peyton. It's hard to know. Oishi. Oishi is Japanese for delicious, I believe. I'm fourth generation Japanese, so I don't know much Japanese at all. Oishi says, as a late millennial baby, I am definitely of two minds on the issue of how technology affects childhood development. So just chiming in here on Welcome to Plathville, the children don't have any kind of television or devices. As a late millennial baby, I'm definitely of two minds on the issue of how technology affects childhood development. On one hand, I can look back fondly at how my dorky friends looked in middle and high school, but at the same time, as a queer kid, as a neurodivergent kid, as a fat kid, I am so grateful for the communities I found online who were able to explain the aspects of my life that were so confusing to me. End of comment. Right. So what Oishi is saying is that on one hand, yeah, having technology in middle school can be a problem in that you're videotaping and posting and taking pictures and then later on you think, oh my goodness, all that is out there. I wish it wasn't. And also cyberbullying and just all the pressure that comes along with all that kind of stuff. So that's on the bad side. But on the good side, what Oishi is saying is that as a queer kid, as a neurodivergent kid, as a fat kid, that they're very grateful for the communities they found online that they wouldn't have been able to find otherwise without their devices when they were in middle school. And yeah, that's what we see when we actually look at the research. It's very tempting to look at technology as a bad thing. And when we look at outcomes and actually study things scientifically, we find that there is a mixture of pros and cons, and it's more complicated than that. Janet says, the parents don't prepare their kids for the real world. I find that very sad. Right, so Janet is saying about Welcome to Plathville that, the kids aren't being prepared for the actual world, and that makes them very sad. Yeah, I don't know, Janet. It's hard to know. When we look at other kids that are exposed to the chaos of society, that can make me very sad too. I think there's just a lot of sadness to go around for our children today, regardless of where they grow up. Anyway, going on to 90 Day Fiancé, Tariq and Hazel. Kara says, Dr. Kirk making me hungry talking about all those foods. Drooly smiley face. I miss restaurants too. Right, so I was talking when Tariq and Hazel were eating at a restaurant, and I must have been talking about how I missed going to restaurants. My mouth is watering too now, Kara. Spicy Mustard says, LMAO, I like when Dr. Honda just names different foods and then sees French toast and names more kinds of food. Is that what I did? Yeah. Habeas says, laugh out loud, first Natalie, then Hazel. When did French toast become the new symbol of American decadence? Yeah, it's interesting that 90 Day Fiancé they have a theme of French toast this year, and given me multiple opportunities to talk about how I don't like French toast or pancakes. I love all other kinds of breakfast food. Frankly, I love all other kinds of food. I mean, I'll eat French toast and pancakes if that's all that there is, but it's just so sweet. Anyway, watching paint dry says, recently broke up with my boyfriend. Ever since then, it's been hard to watch these videos and think about relationships in general. No. But I know that by continuing to watch, I can learn and be a better person in my relationships moving forward. Every day is sad right now. I'm glad for this supportive community. Yeah, watching paint dry, I'm sorry that you recently broke up with your boyfriend. That can be really hard. And when you're watching these videos, like listening to a love song, it might remind you of your loss. And you're sad, you're mourning, you're going through a loss and you're going through grief. But you say you're very glad for this supportive community. And that makes me so happy. If y'all are commenting below or maybe thinking about it, and you can provide support to each other, even if it's just an LOL or something, I think that is a wonderful thing. If you want to spread love and if you want to do your part for this world, and you can, one of the things you can do is when you're watching any video on YouTube, let alone mine, commenting below and actually, just giving people a thumbs up or whatever. I think, and I see a lot of that, which makes me really, really happy. And by the way, we have a number of different other online community spots. We have the Facebook fan page, which I don't run, other people run, fans run it. There's a lot of really wonderful support that's going on there, so Facebook fan page. There's the official Facebook page, which you can like. It's not a community page, but we post things there. There's also our Discord, and if you go to the fan page and ask for an invite to the Discord, if you know what Discord is. If you don't know what Discord is, people think it's mainly for gamers, but it's really for anyone. And we have a whole server there with all sorts of stuff going on there. So yeah, those are the main ones I think that I could tell you to join part of our community. Faye says, as a Filipino, it hurts seeing couples who aren't meeting eye to eye when it comes to religion. There are a lot of people here who aren't religious. Why be with someone whom you are incompatible with when it comes to faith? Just chiming in here. Yeah, it is a bit of a question mark for this season. I don't know about Tariq and Hazel. It seems like Hazel and Tariq are both a little bit flexible on that issue, at least not requiring the other person to convert. But of course, with Mike and Natalie, we see a much more stark example of the incompatibility when it comes to religious beliefs. Yeah, and it is a bit of a question mark. It's like, if it's that important to you, why would you ever date someone that wasn't of your faith? Anyway, they go on to say, Tariq has a valid concern when he went to her church. I can say with full confidence that this is not a normal church in the Philippines. It looks more like a cult. Yeah, so they're just commenting. I always like hearing that kind of stuff. Nicole says, I just noticed that Natalie follows Psychology in Seattle on Instagram, which means that she definitely watches these videos. Does anyone know of any other 90 Day Fiancé participants that follow Psychology in Seattle? End of comment. That's interesting. So Natalie of 90 Day Fiancé follows Psychology, at least an account that it looks like it might be her. Can we ever know for sure? Anyway, that she follows Psychology in Seattle on Instagram, which means she definitely watches the videos. I mean, I guess that's a fair assumption. Who knows? So I don't know who's following. We have thousands of followers on Instagram, and so that's a good question. Who else is following us? Maybe we should look. If y'all know of anybody, I'd be curious. But it does kind of freak me out because when I'm talking about these individuals, to think about them listening to me or watching my videos actually makes me a little nervous. And I guess I should always be thinking that because, there's a chance that they will. And it would really mortify me if I found out that one of these individuals felt hurt by me. I would like to think that the perspective I give is one of non-judgment and of compassion. I'm not afraid to call people out on their behavior if someone's being abusive or something. So anyway, but I'm always careful to say that I don't know how they're editing this show, but anyway. But I do know that a lot of the cast members on the various shows that I've reacted to do watch because they've reached out to us. On 90 Day Fiancé, Ash reached out to me. Actually, well, I won't go into the details, but actually Ash and I go back and forth every now and then. Yara reached out, at least someone that seemed like they might be Yara, but I don't know if it's actually Yara. Paul, definitely. I've actually spoken to him. Erica reached out to me from Erica and Stephanie. And Stephanie seemed to reference us in some article or something. Anyway. And there's also a question mark as to whether or not Larissa or Larissa watches. There was some kind of I vaguely remember a conversation where Larissa was referencing me. Married at First Sight. I did some reaction videos to Married at First Sight, and some of the partners. So about half and half, both cast members will reach out to me, and family members and partners or ex-partners of the cast members will reach out to me and say something like, I'm dating one of the people that you talk about in the videos. Can you give me some insight? And I'm always like, I can't do that. But if you remember Love is Blind, when I first started reacting to that, the Netflix reality TV show, Jessica and Elsie and I know Mark watched because a mutual friend of ours actually told me that he watched the show and didn't like what I was saying about him. And then when I was doing reaction videos to the This Is Paris, the Paris Hilton documentary, a number of the people in the show, in the documentary, actually reached out to me. All right. But if anyone knows of anyone else, do I want to know? I was just going to ask y'all to tell me if you know of anyone else who watches, but on one hand, I don't know if I want to know. I'll tell you, to be honest with you, that I would really like, as I go through this, so when I first started doing the reaction videos, I didn't think anyone would watch, let alone the cast members. As it got more popular, I thought, oh, a lot of people watching. And then I started getting these messages from the cast members, or people were Instagramming or tweeting about us. And I was like, oh my goodness, these people are watching. And that seemed kind of fun. I was like, oh, that I could actually reach these people. It's just kind of interesting. But also that if they listened, maybe they might help. And actually, Jessica and Elsie of Love is Blind actually said as much. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they appreciated what I said, and it was helpful to them on some level. I can't remember exactly what they said. Something along those lines. Anyway, and I thought, oh, that's nice. But then as time went on, I started to feel some of the downside of that contact with the cast members that would complicate things for me. And as a policy now moving forward, I'm mostly thinking that I'm going, if they do contact me, I'll be polite and I'll be communicative on some level, but I'm not going to get involved with them for a lot of, it's like, what am I going to do? A lot of them see me as a clinician, and of course I can't treat them. And I just want to keep my content kind of clean from that influence and from that complication. So that's my general policy on that. So on some level, I'm interested to hear who might be following us or whatever. But on the other hand, I'm mostly wanting to keep my content separate or isolated or clean. Anyway. Mike and Natalie said, Mike and Natalie, the videos on them. Bash says, Natalie doesn't seem to see Mike for who he is, but rather for who he could be. From trying to get him to lose weight, to trying to convert him to her religion, to pushing him to be a father soon, she seems to see him as a project, which is maybe why she stated that she sees potential in him. Mike seems to be very passive and maybe enjoys that she takes the driver's seat in the relationship because it prevents him from needing to be vulnerable and expressing his own needs. They're compatible in that way, but in the end, perhaps neither of them will feel completely satisfied in the relationship. Yeah, Bash, that's very smart. I don't have anything to add to that. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. Particularly the part where you're saying that Mike seems to be passive and enjoys that Natalie will bridge the gap such that he can actually have some closeness, but in the end, that could be a problem for the two of them. Nina says, absolutely, modeling healthy communication should be taught in schools. We say babies don't come with a manual, but maybe they should. Right. So in the video, I was on one of my common soapboxes talking about how attachment and communication should be taught more in schools. And Kelly has a comment on that idea. First-time commenter here. These topics are taught in schools. Not enough of them, but it's growing. It's called social emotional learning. It's all about self-awareness and social awareness, identification and communication about emotions, and pretty much living in a society. Schools should adopt more social emotional learning in their curriculum. Push for it. Yeah. And Kelly, usually when I'm on the soapbox, I know better than to not mention that for sure there are some schools, maybe a lot of schools, that will do some of this education, which I very much appreciate. But I'll tell you, it's not enough. Whatever they're doing, it's not enough. And, unless for me, this is what I would like. It's taught an hour a day. I'm not talking 1 week or an hour a week. I'm talking an hour a day, the same way you spend an hour a day of school on math or language. I feel like for my opinion, and based on research, there's a lot of good outcomes that come from people, everyone learning about attachment theory and emotional awareness and boundaries and self-esteem and, just everything, how to communicate, how to know your feeling. And so to have that an hour a day, imagine what we could do if everyone graduating with a high school diploma had an hour a day of emotional regulation and attachment awareness. It would just be, I just can't imagine what it would do for us. But yeah, Kelly, you're right that it is being taught in schools and it's perhaps going in the right direction, but I feel like it's not nearly enough. But maybe I could be convinced otherwise. I don't know. I mean, I used to do work in schools for many years, over, 15 years or something. I would be contracted by schools to do various different activities. And one of the things that I did for one school is we would have this camp where the kids actually all went to this camp and slept overnight in these cabins. And there were various different psychology-related topics that I was in charge of teaching the kids. And one of the things that they did was all the kids would go into this meeting hall, and there'd be like 300 kids, and they were, 7th, 8th, 9th graders. And one by one, and I was the only adult in the room because the school and I wanted the kids to feel free to say whatever they wanted to say. And since I would mostly, remain confidential depending on the situation, the kids felt freer to talk. And so one by one, kids would come to the front, sit in a hot seat in front of, 200, 300 kids, maybe 200 kids, and talk about their feelings and cry, and they'd get support. And one by one, they do this over a span of, a couple hours, maybe 3 hours. And it was wonderful on a number of different levels. It was normalizing of emotion. People were free to communicate. The cool kids would sit in the hot seat. It wasn't just the dorks that would sit in the hot seat or the emotional people. It was everyone wanted to sit in the hot seat because everyone knew how good it felt to get things off their chest and to get support from other people. There was crying, and there was just a wonderful, wonderful supportive time, a chance for these kids to get things off their chest, but also to see the power of being aware of your emotions, expressing them, and getting support from other people, and to have that normalized on the school basis, and to have it accepted that one could, even the tough football player kid could cry and, get a hug from someone. And it was universal. What I know, I could tell, you can always tell the different cliques that kids will sort of clump into, and really all the different groups of kids would participate. And it was wonderful. But it was just once a year. And in my book, that's got to happen once a week. That kind of, maybe one, I don't know, more often than that. Because every year they'd come back to that camp, and I would see just continual stress that these kids were under without many ways to alleviate that stress. And so it was like this, we would do this intervention for a few days, and we would set them right in some ways or get some stuff off their chest. And then they'd have a whole year of building stuff up, essentially, in general. I mean, certainly some of the kids weren't, and some of the kids were in therapy outside of the thing as well. But anyway, my point is that I hope that we're heading in that direction the way Kelly is saying it. And yes, I am pushing for it. So if you're an educator or you're in charge or you're a parent, just bring it up and just say, hey, I was just wondering if we're allocating time for emotional regulation and communication and relationships and self-esteem and psychology awareness, and just, age appropriate. 8-year-olds, you got to give 8-year-olds a particular version of this. You don't give them the full, education of it the way you would give like a 17-year-old. And something's got to be taken away. That's the problem. If you add a curriculum, you don't just add another hour to the school day. Something's got to go. And what goes? Well, then you run into problems because there's a lot of politics in that and a lot of tradition in that. But anyway, Super Chavez says, I am very happily married, but the first year I lived with my husband, we literally communicated like these two, like Mike and Natalie. So I am very happily married, but the first year I lived with my husband, we literally communicated like these two because we were both too afraid to be vulnerable. After we were engaged, we almost broke up, but decided to go to couples therapy to finally understand one another and realize how much we loved each other and how afraid of losing one another we were. Well, Super Chava, that warms my heart. I'm so glad that you did that. You were in a relationship like that's my contention with Mike and Natalie, is that they have the potential to be loving and having a good time and having a intimate time, maybe occasional conflicts here and there, like they were when they first met. But because of their traumas, I'm guessing, and the way that they come together, their walls go up, and then that hurts the other person, and there's this constant state of distance. And you're saying, Super Chava, that you were in a relationship like that, and you almost broke up, but you went to couples therapy, and you lived happily ever after, and that's great. Nithra says, two people talking to walls is such a good way to describe their relationship. I feel sad for them because if they were taught better communication, they probably could have a good relationship. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if they went to just one session of couples therapy, that might be all that they need. Because the kinds of problems that I see in couples therapy are much more difficult than the kinds of problems that at least it seems that Mike and Natalie are suffering from. Alyssa says, I believe that if the cat meows, we should get to see the cat. It's only fair. Yeah, well, the cat was here. She's eating food. I think she might be done. I'll bring her back. So she's an old lady, and she can't, or I think she can, but I think it hurts her bones to jump up here, so I actually have to physically put her in there. All right. Stephanie and Ryan videos. Good old Stephanie and Ryan. Nithra says, it's always a bad sign when it's the very beginning of being introduced to this couple and they are fighting the first time we see them interact. Yeah, and what a fight that they were in. MBT says, oh man, if they break up, he loses his job. Not sure he understands how deeply his life is in her hands. Yeah. Liz says, it does seem like she could be using the gift money and sending money, etc., as a form of control over him. As the good doctor would say, yikes. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is she using this as a way of controlling him? And then Liz says, as the good doctor would say, yikes. That's a nice compliment, calling me the good doctor. I don't know why I like that, but it's nice. Federic says, nothing hurts me more when people say, after everything I've done for you. Yeah, right. So Stephanie was saying, after everything I've done for you. And you're like, oh boy, it's keeping tabs and suggesting that my input in the relationship doesn't matter feels very controlling and dismissive. Right. If you're in the middle of a conflict and you're pushing back or you're asserting your needs or something, and someone says, after everything I've done for you, you have to wonder if they're saying that as a way of trying to shut you up, which is not a good look. Eva says, what I am seeing here is a worried mother talking to her teenage son who didn't do his homework. Yeah. Jane says, Stephanie's accent is like a mixture of Michigan and Xanax. Right. So I was talking about how I think I said, or at least I remember thinking this. So that's part of the problem with these videos is I do so many of them. I don't know if I said it or I thought it, but I definitely thought that Stephanie might have some sort of level of intoxication when she is on the show. There's nothing wrong with drinking a few glasses of wine and going on being a cast member on a reality TV show. But it was a question. And I guess it's also possible that she suffers from anxiety and she takes benzodiazepine. Who knows? But yeah, the way that she talks, it's a mixture of her accent, which is, from what I understand from people from that neck of the woods, they'll tell me that, yes, it's not typical to all Michigan, her accent, but it's definitely a part of some people who live in Michigan. So I think the way that she talks is a result of that and a result of potential intoxication. I don't want to, say that that's obviously what it is because there's no way to know. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with being intoxicated. Rebecca and there can be something wrong with being intoxicated and chronically intoxicated, but there's nothing wrong with a moment of intoxication. Rebecca and Zied video. T says, we're really easygoing people. Yeah, people that are not easygoing, right? So Tia's saying, remember when they said, we're very easygoing people? And yeah, they didn't, at least Micah didn't seem like an easygoing person in that way. Eva says, these kids sentenced Zied without a trial. So the kids of Rebecca, the daughter and her boyfriend, these guys sentenced Zied without a trial. The way they talk about him coming from a different culture is like he is not even human. Agreed. Kayla, yikes is the word of the day for Rebecca's family. This is such ignorant and aggressive behavior. Micah seems like a full-blown racist. Zied is not perfect, but treating him like a subhuman will not make him feel welcome. Yeah. Alyssa, well, the cat left. I think she might have to go to the bathroom. I might have to open the door. Yeah, definite bathroom break there for the cat, Michelle. Alyssa says, as someone with borderline personality disorder, I really appreciate how you talk about personality and attachment with compassion, Dr. Kirk. Yeah. And if you're interested in more talk about personality disorders, you can listen to our audio version of the podcast, either on YouTube or on a podcast app. I talk about borderline often because a lot of people email me and ask questions. And it's a specialty of mine to treat people with borderline. Lydia says, the number of yikes per episode has gone up this season. Poor Doc. Have they? Have there been more yikes this season? It doesn't feel like it. I feel like with, anyway, maybe they have been more yikes this season. I mean, I think I was thinking about that, how of the couples, let me look at my list of the couples. Of the couples that are on the show, you have Stephanie and Ryan, who just seem like they're a no-go from the start. You have Andrew and Amira, and when you hear from Amira in that first episode, she talked about how she felt completely intimidated and forced to coming to Mexico. And there were just huge red flags in what she was talking about in that interview. You have Brandon and Julia, which seem like they could work, but Brandon has some serious issues that he needs to work out in therapy. Now my cat is back. Actually, no, it's not the cat. It's the puppy. The puppy is visiting. All right. Puppy came and left. Cat came and left and went, and now the cat is back. Brandon and Julia seem like they could absolutely work. Brandon needs a lot of therapy. Mike and Natalie, they seem like they're not working. Tariq and Hazel seem like they're working. Jovi and Yara seem like they don't like each other very much. And then other times it seems like they do. But they've got big issues. And then you have Rebecca and Zia that seem like they legitimately. Anyway, the point is that it just seems like so many of the relationships seem. It just seems like so many of the couples have a lot of yikes in them. Sweetie Darlin says, been in an international relationship myself. This episode makes me so grateful for my super sweet in-laws. They might still not completely understand where I'm from or how our countries differ, but they've always been very welcome to me. Yeah, it is kind of interesting on the show how unwelcoming a lot of the in-laws can be. Katie says, Zied had a very hard time leaving his country. He barely wanted to leave. I do wish Americans would realize their country has a lot of issues and not everyone wants to move there. Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why Americans don't want to live in America. So it is completely arrogant to believe that everyone wants to move to the United States, and the United States is the best country in the world. It's, I've talked about this before, American exceptionalism and what we've been taught in our culture to believe, and the fact that we have very little contact geographically with other cultures. And anyway, Tamkar says, Rebecca's family seems prejudiced against Zied, and I don't like it. Yeah. Kalila says, I think they were hoping to poke and harass him, so the daughter and the boyfriend. I think they were hoping to poke and harass Zied to the point he blows up so they can point and say, see, he's crazy. He doesn't love you. Yeah, agreed. It's like, what? So you're going to poke him so he gets angry, and what is that going to prove? That you're a jerk face? Stella Annie says, these types of people also tend to say, I'm just brutally honest when they're actually being an a-hole. Yeah, agreed. All right, so those are those videos, but then I also did an audio episode on loneliness last week, and a lot of y'all had some comments on that. A lot of you were being very supportive to Christy, who was being interviewed, and I just want to thank. And she actually reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, the comments are so supportive and nice. Like, it's just really great to see." So she read the comments and appreciated them. Marielle says, so this episode was me interviewing my friend and colleague, Christy, on her experience with loneliness. And we went into a lot of depth, I thought. Marielle says, thank you for this, Dr. Kirk and Christy, for your openness and vulnerability. This is so important to share, especially from a professional perspective. I feel there is such a taboo around this topic of loneliness and such judgment, even from professionals. People often just try to throw activities your way as a means to cure your loneliness, but then don't want to deal with the pain or sense of isolation of loneliness, or just listen without offering solutions or unwanted advice. At the age of 51, having experienced loneliness off and on since I was young, I find there is no easy fix. But more openness can definitely benefit everyone. I hope many listeners will really listen and reflect on your words. Yeah, so this is something that I found in my exploration of loneliness in clients and friends of mine, frankly, and this predated the pandemic, which made it worse, the loneliness that people are experiencing. But for decades now, I've been boggled by people around me who experience a lot of loneliness. I have a number of people that I either am treating or that I know personally or professionally. And there's always this contingent of people that are experiencing chronic loneliness. And I could never really figure out the difference. The common thing to think is, oh, well, the people who are lonely, they lack social skills, or they're an a-hole or something. There's something different about them, but I could never really figure out what it was. I mean, obviously, childhood trauma can throw a wrench in things for sure. But there are plenty of people with childhood trauma that have no loneliness or very little loneliness. So it's been something that I've been looking into, and doing this episode was part of it. And a big part of my understanding has come to this point where I now, when I hear people are lonely or people ask me for solutions for their loneliness, I don't just give them tips. I might give them tips, but I'm always sure to say, your loneliness is bigger and more potentially more stubborn than any kind of tip can alleviate. And to act like, here are 5 tips to alleviate your loneliness, is discounting to your experience and demeaning to you, really, as if you didn't know that you should maybe go to more parties and try to socialize, or whatever the tip is, and that it goes way deeper than that. And so I find that, for me, loneliness in some people is actually extremely confusing to me. Like with Christy, I'm very confused because she's nice and smart and accommodating and interesting and energetic, and she puts effort. She's loyal as a friend. And the fact that she experiences loneliness is bizarre to me, honestly. And so I just think that it's an important topic, as Marielle is saying, that we should just bring up and just say, hey, we don't know the answers all the time, and a lot of people are experiencing it, and it's very hard for people. It's a lot of pain, and let's not simplify it to, top 5 ways of alleviating your loneliness. Halamak says, as a sexual assault survivor, it's very comforting to hear Christy talk about her experiences. It was very helpful for me. Yeah. Christy has, for years now, been advocating for victim or survivor rights and awareness, and she's been quite open about it as a survivor and as a clinician. In fact, her work in this area was so impressive to me that I nominated her for our local association for Student of the Year, and she won. So she won the Washington State Student of the Year in Marriage and Family Therapy. Because she's a wonderful person, very good student, very good therapist, and she's been advocating for years for survivors in this very open way, and she did that in the episode as well. Danny says, when she talked about her thoughts, fears, and actions and guilt while going on dates, it made me cry. Being a woman in this world is extremely hard. I'm sending her love and wish her to meet someone who deserves all that she has to offer. Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca says, gosh, I don't think I've ever related to a podcast so personally before. I've never felt so understood. Thank you. Well, glad for that, Rebecca, for sure. Syria says, I will say that you can't assume you know who's lonely and who is not. I have been married and lonely. I have been surrounded by a group of friends and lonely. I have been at times surrounded by my wonderful, loving family and have felt lonely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a big difference between being with people and being with people, if you know what I mean. Loves Dog says, isn't chronic lifelong loneliness part of childhood emotional neglect? Yeah, it can be, for sure. As I was saying, abuse and neglect. I guess the cat doesn't want to be here. The cat is exercising her rights to not be on YouTube. Liz says, Doc, this episode is right on time. I am struggling with loneliness. I was already super isolated in general, then more isolation from the pandemic, and then I lost my father, who I lived with, to COVID in October. It has been utter hell. Yes, Liz, I'm really sorry. Just really sorry you're going through that. Losing your father that you lived with to COVID, potentially a preventable thing if our country had reacted better. And it's just such a tragedy. And Rebecca, I don't know if you know Rebecca, she's a co-host on the podcast sometimes. And she reached out to me actually just now, texting me about how there's a pretty good chance we're going to lose about 500,000 people to COVID in the United States and millions around the world. But 500,000 Americans dead because of a virus that could have been contained. Now, there probably would have been a good amount of deaths no matter what we did. But so many of the deaths were unnecessary. And all you got to do is look at other countries and see the way that they reacted and see that there were different rates of death per capita. That's always the key. You want to look at per capita deaths, right? And so, but regardless of that, it's just, even if there was nothing we could do, 500,000 deaths, maybe more, in the span of a year from one thing is a tragedy, and there's going to be so much sadness, and there already is so much death, so much mourning, so much grief that will last maybe 100 years in terms of the sadness of what we went through and what we're going through. And so, Liz, I'm with you on that. And I'm guessing people were supportive to you when you commented. I hope they were anyway. So let's all support each other in person, on the phone, in the comments below. Let's all do what we can to be there for each other, because when we're all mutually there for each other, we're a little less lonely, because we deserve it. We really, really do.